Arsenal Football Club were a shambles, having their club captain walk off the pitch and tell the fans to F off, to countless embarrassing defeats to the likes of Manchester City and Liverpool. This was no smooth ride. Mikel Arteta had to turn a club that was rotting into a club that can challenge on all fronts. Before I get into this wonderful journey of multiple ups and downs, I'd like to ask you guys to please subscribe, like and turn on post notifications. And without further ado, let's begin. Unai Emery, the man that came before Mikel Arteta. From getting the club to the closest they had ever been to top 4 in 3 years, to also guiding them to a Europa League final. Makes for decent reading on paper. There was never a connection between manager and fans. It almost felt like there was a bridge preventing any sort of love and connection from starting that a club needs for success. Mikel Arteta's unique selling point was that he was a club captain, somebody who loved Arsenal inside out, somebody that wanted Arsenal to be the best club they can possibly be. And that's something you can't just have as a manager. This instantly brought the fans together to support the players and to support the philosophy at play. Even though the results didn't come quickly, it was clear to see that there was an energy and passion between manager and fans. In Arteta's first interview, he said that he wanted to bring passion, energy and aggression to the club. And this was so important to what made the relationship between the fans and the club closer, but also brought the results we see today. To ensure we see how big of a job Arteta has done, I'm going to be looking at 3 separate things that have made the club improve from where it was when he first came in. Number 1 is getting rid of dead wood. Winning the FA Cup in his first season will always be a moment that was crucial in Arteta's managerial career and his longevity at Arsenal. Who knows, maybe that FA Cup was what made him stay in the job after that difficult lockdown period. But if we look in isolation at the players that he had at his disposal, a lot of them come under that category of dead wood. The likes of Socrates, Mustafi, Kolasinac are all players who are a distant memory in Arteta's Arsenal project. These players were on very, very high wages and contributing very, very little to the squad. It was not easy to get these players off the books, but in the long term, it made a real difference to our club. However, it's all good looking at the likes of Socrates, Mustafi and Kolasinac. But if we look at the players which we had to let go for next to zero, like Mesut Ozil, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Alexander Lacazette, all players that had contributed so much to the club before Arteta came in. At the time, I remember there was a lot of backlash when Arteta started phasing out these big superstars. But I think when he did that, looking back on it, it was the best thing he could possibly do. He wanted to make sure that at his disposal, he had a team that actually loved and worked hard for each other, rather than one full of individuals and superstars who were full of themselves. And if we look at this current crop of Arsenal players, you can't really look at players in the eyes and say, you are a superstar, you are the main player in this team. Everybody knows they have to work hard for each other if they want to stay in the lineup. Long gone are the days where we can see a team that is so disconnected, but we see one that is loving. And that love doesn't just transmit to the players, it transmits through the coach and the fans. Something which didn't happen during Unai Emery's tenure. Next up, the revolution of Granit Xhaka alone deserves a segment. I think what Mikel Arteta did with him just shows how he rebuilt the club from the trenches to where it is now. Granit Xhaka was halfway out the door. If you remember closely that game against Crystal Palace, he walked off the pitch in anger, took off his shirt and virtually checked out of being an Arsenal player. Mikel Arteta even said that Granit Xhaka wanted to leave when he came in. He did not want to play and kick a ball for Arsenal again. It would have took magic dust to change his mentality and opinion around. But Mikel Arteta did that. He managed to make Granit Xhaka stay and show him that there's a project here. Not many managers around the world could convince a player that was outside the door to stay and play a crucial part in a title challenge just a couple years later. Who would have thought that Granit Xhaka would leave Arsenal 3 to 4 years later and the fans would be upset and disappointed. And even now, during this fantastic season, where we find ourselves in first place in the Premier League and in a Champions League quarter-final, we would still think that Granit Xhaka could play in this team and take us to another level. If you ask the players who have worked under Mikel Arteta, they will say they've never seen anything like him before. Not only is he a great coach, but he's a brilliant manager. He can pull a player to the side and explain clearly what he wants from them, and he can connect with the player, make them feel as if they're his son. This is such an underrated thing to have for a manager, to make your players feel connected and close to you. 9 times out of 10 then transmits onto the pitch. You see players that are playing with love and care for each other and for the manager. They want to win for Arteta and they want to win for Arsenal. Finally, when we look at the success of the Arteta era, it is only right that we look at transfer strategy and trusting the youngsters. The likes of Emil Smith-Rowe and Bukayo Saka have really come into their own ever since Arteta. They've really taken responsibility and often carried the club on its back. And when a young manager trusts young players, it's just a match made in heaven. Arteta recognised that the club, for it to move forward, he had to look at Hale End and the quality that was in it. Academy graduates automatically are loved by the fans, and Arteta knew to have the fans on side, he had to play them. Even if it meant phasing out record signing Nicolas Pepe, who never ever really hit the ground running. And if it meant phasing out Mesut Ozil for Emil Smith-Rowe. This is ultimately the change that Arteta made that brought a fresh needed change and a new sense of direction towards bringing success. Next, when we look at the transfer strategy and the sort of players which Arteta has brought in, especially now when the funds are available and Arsenal are buying the top players, all of them have this leadership gene. If we look at Kai Havertz, for example, he was captain of Leverkusen at such a young age. He was one of the most important players in that squad and knew about taking responsibility. Another example is Jurriën Timber and Declan Rice. Both have been captains of massive clubs and also know the responsibility and demand needed when you play for these top clubs. By building an 11 full of leaders, Arteta ensures that nobody hides on the pitch. Far too many seasons before Arteta came in, Arsenal were bullied and controlled. Now with the physical threat in both attack and defence, Arsenal no longer get bullied. Each and every player knows what it means to win duels. And this is important as it's showing now on the pitch that Arsenal can compete both on a technical and physical level. We kind of looking like the invisible side, where there was technical quality, but there was also grit, fight and determination in those crucial midfield areas. A quote which just makes sense is that Arsene Wenger built the Emirates Stadium and Mikel Arteta gave it a soul.